History does not usually leave loose ends. Wars end in treaties. Deaths get autopsies. Empires collapse and historians explain exactly why. But a small number of cases refuse to close, no matter how many experts, decades, or forensic tools get thrown at them. These are not legends. They are documented, physical, verifiable events with a piece missing at the center. And that missing piece is what makes them dangerous to think about for too long. Bohemia, 1912. A rare book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich purchased an ancient manuscript from a Jesuit college near Rome. Roughly 240 pages of vellum covered in an alphabet nobody had ever seen. The text is written fluently, left to right, with consistent grammar-like patterns, alongside illustrations of plants that do not exist in nature, star charts with no matching constellations, and naked women bathing in green liquid through tubes of unclear anatomical purpose. Carbon dating in 2009 placed the vellum between 1404 and 1438, ruling out a modern hoax by roughly 5 centuries. Every attempted decode, by amateur codebreakers, university linguists, and the same American cryptanalysts who broke Japanese naval codes in World War II, has failed completely. The manuscript sits behind glass at Yale's Beinecke Library today, fully digitized, fully public, and fully unreadable. 600 years of ink, and nobody alive knows what it says. Northern Ural Mountains, February 1959. 9 experienced Soviet hikers, most of them engineering students, set up camp on the slope of a mountain the local Mansi people called Kholat Syakhl, translated roughly as Dead Mountain. Search parties found their tent 3 weeks later, cut open from the inside, with boots and warm clothing left behind. The bodies were scattered across 1,000 meters of forest, some in only socks, in temperatures around minus 25 degrees Celsius. 2 hikers had fractured skulls. 2 had massive chest fractures consistent with the force of a car crash, yet no external wounds or broken skin. 1 woman was missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her lips. Soviet investigators closed the case within a month, citing an unknown compelling natural force, then classified the files for the next 25 years. Radiation traces were later found on some of the clothing. A 2019 Russian government reinvestigation concluded an avalanche, and independent physicists modeling snow slab behavior in 2021 came to a similar result. The chest injuries still do not fully match a slab avalanche. Neither does the missing tongue, EG&C, 1901. Greek sponge divers working off the island of Antikythera pulled a corroded bronze lump from a 2,000-year-old shipwreck, then set it aside as scrap for 2 years before anyone noticed the gear teeth inside. What they had was a hand-cranked analog computer, containing at least 30 interlocking bronze gears calibrated to predict solar and lunar eclipses, track the phases of the moon, and calculate the timing of the ancient Olympic Games. Nothing built with comparable mechanical complexity appears again in the historical record for roughly 1,400 years. The device implies a tradition of precision engineering in the ancient Mediterranean that left almost no other trace. No workshops, no blueprints, no second machine. One object, doing the work of a Renaissance clock, buried at the bottom of the sea since roughly 70 BCE. The engineers who built it are entirely anonymous. So is everyone who might have built the ones that came before it. Roanoke Island, Virginia Colony, 1587 to 1590. John White led a group of 115 English settlers to a small island off the coast of what is now North Carolina, then sailed back to England for supplies, delayed for 3 years by war with Spain. When he finally returned in August 1590, the settlement was gone, houses dismantled, no bodies, no signs of a struggle or fire. The only clue was a single word carved into a wooden post, Croatoan, the name of a nearby island and allied tribe. White never got the chance to search it. A storm forced his ships back to England before he could investigate, and he died without ever returning. No conclusive trace of the colonists has ever surfaced, despite DNA studies, archaeological digs, and centuries of theories ranging from assimilation with local tribes to Spanish attack to simple starvation. A colony of 115 people, erased down to 9 letters carved in wood, Baghdad, Iraq, 1936. Workers excavating near the ancient site of Kujut Rabu uncovered a small clay jar, roughly 5 inches tall, containing a copper cylinder, an iron rod, and traces of an acidic residue believed to be vinegar or wine. Wilhelm Koenig, the German archaeologist who catalogued it, proposed something that sounded absurd for 1930s Mesopotamia: a battery. Modern replicas built to the same specifications generate a small but real electrical current, somewhere between half a volt and 2 volts. The jar dates to somewhere between 250 BCE and 250 CE, roughly 1,500 years before Alessandro Volta is credited with inventing the electric battery in Italy. No wires were found nearby. No obvious application has ever been proven. Silver electroplating and religious ritual are the two leading guesses, and neither one is confirmed. 3 jars like it have been found in total. All 3 raise the same unanswered question. If this civilization had electricity, what, exactly, did they use it for? Washington State, November 1971. A man calling himself Dan Cooper bought a one-way ticket on Northwest Orient Flight 305, then handed a flight attendant a note claiming he had a bomb. He demanded $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes, received both after the plane landed in Seattle, released all 36 passengers, then ordered the crew to fly toward Mexico at a low altitude with the landing gear down. Somewhere over the dense forest of southwestern Washington, in freezing rain, he lowered the plane's rear staircase and jumped into the night. He was never seen again. The FBI investigated more than 1,000 suspects over 45 years before formally suspending the case in 2016. In 1980, a boy digging on the bank of the Columbia River found roughly $5,800 of the ransom cash, disintegrating and rubber banded and nothing else. No parachute, no body. No definitive answer as to whether he survived the jump at all. Atlantic Ocean, December 1872. The merchant ship Mary Celeste was found drifting off the coast of Portugal, fully seaworthy, sails partially set, with 6 months of food and water still stocked below deck. Her cargo of 701 barrels of industrial alcohol sat undisturbed and still sealed. The captain's chronometer, sextant, and personal papers were gone, but his family's belongings, including a child's toys, remained untouched in the cabin. Not a single member of the 10-person crew, captain, wife, 2-year-old daughter, and 7 sailors, was ever found alive, dead, or anywhere else, ever again. The ship's final logged position placed her roughly 400 nautical miles from where she was actually discovered, with no storm damage and no signs of piracy, mutiny, or fire. Insurance investigators, naval officers, and later novelists all produced competing theories: a rogue wave, alcohol fumes, a sea monster invented for the newspapers, and none of them account for why an experienced captain would abandon a functioning, fully stocked ship in the middle of the ocean. The lifeboat was missing. Nothing else was southern coastal plain of Peru, sometime between 500 BCE and 500 CE. The Nazca people carved more than 800 straight lines, 300 geometric shapes, and 70 animal and plant figures directly into the desert floor, some stretching longer than 9 kilometers, by removing a thin layer of reddish pebbles to expose the pale ground beneath. A hummingbird nearly 100 meters long, a monkey with a spiraled tail, a spider drawn in a single unbroken line. The lines are so large and so precise that they are genuinely legible only from an altitude of several hundred meters, a perspective the Nazca had no confirmed technology to reach. Wind erosion in the region is negligible. Low rainfall and a natural coating of iron oxide have kept the lines intact for roughly 2,000 years with almost no maintenance. Proposed explanations range from astronomical calendars to ritual walking paths to water cult iconography, and each explanation accounts for some of the figures while failing to explain the rest. The people who made them left no written language behind to ask. Siberia, June 30, 1908. At roughly 7:14 in the morning, an explosion over the Podkamennaya Tunguska River flattened an estimated 80 million trees across 150 square kilometers of forest, an area larger than the city of London, with a force later estimated at somewhere between 10 and 15 megatons, roughly 1,000 times the yield of the Hiroshima bomb. The blast knocked people off their feet nearly 100 kilometers away and shattered windows across the region. For the next several nights, skies as far as London stayed bright enough to read a newspaper outdoors at midnight. The Russian Empire, then consumed by war and revolution, did not send a scientific expedition to the site for 19 years. When Soviet mineralogist Leonid Kulik finally reached the remote area in 1927, he found the trees scorched and felled outward in a radial pattern from a central point, but no crater and no meteorite fragments. The leading theory remains an airburst from a stony asteroid or comet fragment, roughly 60 to 190 meters wide, exploding 5 to 10 kilometers above the ground before it ever touched the Earth. More than a century of soil sampling has never produced a conclusive fragment. An explosion large enough to be seen from London left the ground itself almost undisturbed. Every one of these cases shares the same structure. Real evidence, real dates, real objects you can see in a museum or documents you can read online today. And in every case, the evidence stops just short of an answer, as if history itself left the last page missing on purpose. Investigators change. Technology improves. Carbon dating gets more precise, and DNA testing gets cheaper every year. The gaps do not close. If anything, better tools tend to eliminate the easy explanations first, leaving only the difficult ones standing. A cipher no machine can break. A death scene physics cannot fully model. A machine with no ancestor and no descendant. A word carved into wood with nothing behind it. A battery with no wires. A man who fell out of the sky and never landed on any record again. The comfortable version of history assumes every mystery is a temporary problem, solvable with enough patience. Most of the time, that assumption is correct. Lost cities get found. Forged documents get exposed. Unmarked graves eventually get names. But these 6 cases have already outlasted the technology, the governments, and in most instances, the original investigators who first opened them. The Voynich Manuscript has survived the entire history of modern cryptography completely intact. Roanoke has survived 4 centuries of English and American historians. The Antikythera Mechanism has survived over a century of engineers taking it apart, digitally scanning it, and rebuilding working replicas, and still cannot say who built the original, or why nothing like it exists again for over 1,000 years afterward. Some mysteries get solved because someone finally asks the right question. Others stay open because the right question may no longer be answerable at all. The people who knew, the records that explained, the context that would make sense of the object, gone long before anyone thought to preserve it. That is the quiet, uncomfortable fact sitting underneath every case on this list. It is not that no one has looked hard enough. It is that looking harder assumes the answer is still there to find: a manuscript, a mountain, a machine, an island, a jar, a staircase, a ship, a desert, a forest with no crater. 9 separate puzzles spread across 4 continents and 3,000 years, and not one of them has ever produced a final page. The evidence is not missing. The explanation is.